you can have a copy emailed to you. First, the Western world as we knew it is in trouble. Second point is the economic activity is moving to the east. Africa is on the rise, and because of those 2 points, we have a window of opportunity. I was born on this continent. I grew up here. I have never seen our opportunity as attractive as I see it now, and I will make that point. And I will try to highlight a few opportunities, including some where we fare pretty dismally. So, let's race through. The developed world is in trouble. If you look at the left-hand chart, that's money supply. We have printed more money since 2008 financial crisis than we've printed since the Second World War. Now, each of you run your own family businesses. You understand that if you spend more every month than you earn, then it's not going to take too long for you to be in trouble. If you can print money, and you have a neighbor who learned that lesson also, but if you can print money, then it's a recipe for disaster. Look at the left-hand chart. That's how much money we've printed. Secondly, no wonder then that the percentage of debt that the governments have increase. That's the left-hand chart. We now have a number of Western governments that own more than 80% and in some cases 120% of their GDP in debt. If your debt is more than 1 year of your income, work out for how long you're going to take before you pay it back. Third point, therefore the credit rating for these countries deteriorate. You see in the bottom there, some of the European countries now have a lower credit rating than a number of African countries. The unemployment issue in Europe and in the US is going to bite us in the back. The left-hand chart shows unemployment. The right-hand chart shows you that in Greece and Spain, unemployment is a quarter of the people. This chart shows young unemployed adults. Ladies and gentlemen, we have in some cases 12, 15, and in some cases 55% in Greece, 53% in Spain, 36% in Italy, 23% in France, of young people unemployed. Young people who are unemployed are angry. Also for governments, take note. If half of your voters are young and half of those are unemployed, think where you should make your point. So, my first point. The Western world, debt is out of control. Developing countries print money, developed countries print money to grow them out of the situation, and we sit with an angry, unemployed youth. Second big point is the world's moving east, meaning the economic activity is shifting to the east. The graph on the left, and if any of you ever wondered whether the Bible has a statistical section in it, here's the proof. I have numbers until the year 0. If you look at this chart, until the 1800s, roughly half of the world's GDP was produced in the East. The industrialization happened. That's the big dip in the green, when the Western world, as we know it today, became the bulk of the activity. In the last decade, the green is coming up, and ladies and gentlemen, in a couple of years' time, India and China, just the two of them alone together, will be half of the world's GDP. The emerging economies are all outperforming the old world. The emerging economies has emerged. If you can't see it on the left, all those bubbles there are small emerging economies, including African economies, who grow between 5 and 8 and 10% per year, year on year on year. This is a representation of how the cake that we share increased from 1.6 trillion as global GDP by 2003 to 8.2 trillion today, and we think 13 trillion by 2017. Remember the number on the left. 1.6 trillion was China's GDP by 2003. I'll come back to that. Here is another very interesting point. Every nation has a sovereign wealth fund. That's where they keep your savings. Of the 20 biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world today, there is not a single one outside of Asia. These are the 20 biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world, all in Asia. The world is moving east. And I'm sorry, some of it is in Africa. It's really the Middle East, so let's not be too proud. The other important point is, let's look at our people. The left-hand slide shows you the population distribution in China. From every one of those bars are 5 years. So China is fat in the middle because of the one-child policy that they had for a long time. There are no young people. China is going to run out of people. They have 1.4 billion people. They're going to run out of people. Because as these old guys get older, there's nobody coming up from the bottom. India has 1 billion people, but they have mainly young people. As these young people go through the machine, they have a very different experience than China. The left-hand chart is Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa has only young people. And we die early so far. But we're getting older and older. So as we sit in this room and we think about our policies that we run and our investments that we make and the opportunities that comes with that, look at that beautiful chart. And just to show you the comparison on the right, that's Europe. Old and fat in the middle. Old and fat in the middle has a huge dilemma. Every one of us who pay into a pension scheme that has been set up as a scheme where the young guys pay in the bottom and the old guys benefit at the top. You have two problems here. There are no young people to pay in at the bottom. And the second problem is the old guys who take at the top, they live longer and longer. So where in the past you were lucky they all died at 70 and you stopped paying them pensions, now they live to 90. They want another 20 years of pension. There's nobody that puts anything at the bottom because there's no young people around. And of those young people that are around, 55% in some cases I showed you earlier is unemployed. Unemployed people don't earn, don't contribute, they hold hands out. And if you don't put anything in their hands, they get angry. And you look at the news, how they get angry. And the governments need to understand the role of the government is to stimulate the investment of private sector, not to run the show. The cases where they ran the show, as I've just shown, has dismally underperformed. So, my second point, world's moving east. We have a real issue to deal with our people. And that in itself show very weak fundamentals for anybody to invest in the old world. That's the window of opportunity that we have today in Africa. If people look for investment opportunities and they look my analysis of the world in the eye, they would say, let's go dance with a lady in Africa. And here we have a situation where We talk, let's not be shy. Africa is 3 times the size of China. Africa is 10 times the size of India. Has 1 billion people just like India. Has 1 billion people almost the same as China. But let's also be humble. On the left, you see world GDP. The literally green on the top, that's Africa. So our size in the world economy, although we are very proud, is still a small little sliver. That sliver, ladies and gentlemen, today is $1.3 trillion. Africa, as percentage of the world, is 1.3 trillion out of 63 trillion. I told you earlier to remember the number for China. That was 1.6 trillion. Let's call it the same. 1.6, 1.3 is rounding error. So in 2003, China was 1.3. Today, I'll show you. This is our debt. Africa is less debt per GDP as most of our European trading partners. We are more attractive than most of our European trading partners. Our debt to GDP is lower, therefore our credit is more attractive than it's ever been in my working history. We can borrow money in Africa today for less than we have ever been able to do. We have a higher inflow of money, the graphs on the left, than we have ever seen. There are now 29 stock exchanges in Africa attracting more money inflow. But on the graph on the left, it shows the green bit, the increase in our population. And on the right, I remind you the chart I showed you earlier. Ons broei nog baie lekker. We will have to look into this. Because unless we offer this young workforce something, they get angry, as we've learned in Europe. This chart will be hard for you to see, but it shows on the left how very significant improvements we've made in health, in education, in infant mortality, increasing life. But we are still way, way behind the Western world. Our problem is, and I will come back to that, our problem is very little of these can be done if you don't have electricity. If you can't keep your medicine in a refrigerator, don't be surprised if people die young. Our countries are politically more stable than it's been for decades. We had 28 elections in Africa over the last 2.5 years. More than we had in my youth in 2 decades. So, in summary, Africa is economically more stable than it's been in a long time. It's politically more stable than it's been in a long time. We have a beautiful demographic if we offer them the training to increase their productivity and to work. And lastly, we benefit because the world's in trouble. And one thing that we benefit more than you think is we have the largest return of skilled people to Africa than we have ever seen. The bright Namibian guy who went to Harvard cannot find a job in the US. He comes back to Namibia. He cannot find a job in France if he went to INSEAD. He comes back. We have the largest return of skilled people to the continent than we have ever seen. The fourth point is, where do we see opportunity? I'm going to race through this very quick and just touch on a whole number of points of mega trends that will drive the economic growth of this continent and that will create the opportunity for every one of us in this room to build something of world scale. Do not wait for the government. It is not the government's role to do these things. I'm sorry. We all decided we're going to take some of our money, we put it in a pot, and we pick a few people to manage those for us. We call it taxes. And somebody to manage those. And they manage those in a way to do things for us that we can't do individually. So we decided to club in and do that. That's all. We didn't want to take all our money in a pot and then tell people to run our lives. If we approach it like that, then this money that we put in a pot and we get these people to manage it for us, they will help us to build businesses so we can create jobs for those young people, because hard to come to this reality that in the Western world, my children and your children will be the first generation in the Western world that has a lower quality of life than their parents. The youngster in Europe will work his first 5 years to pay for the benefits of his parents in unfunded pension schemes, in social security, in all the other benefits that we thought we can just have. Just like your budget at home. If you spend more than you earn consistently over time, do not be surprised if you're in deep trouble. I'm racing through. Africa is becoming incredibly attractive. The graph shows, the graph on your right shows the increase in consumption expenditure of the middle class. There is every year 10 million Africans that move into the middle class that has money to spend, who want to watch a TV that they didn't do last year, who want to drink something that they didn't do last year. That's an enormous, enormous opportunity. We have some of the most arable land in the world, and as a continent, we're a net importer of food. Now, isn't that an embarrassment? We have some of the most arable land in the world, and we import food. That's an opportunity. We have an incredible labor force. We will be, as you see from the top left-hand bar, growth in labor force, 550 million labor force, larger than India by 2020. Our labor productivity is still very low. On the right, China is at 8%, we're at 2%. So let's get our act together and learn to work harder and smarter. And just like China, once we're at 8%, our GDP will grow from 1.3 to, you will see later. Since Hades is here, I thought, Mr. Tilahun, I put the room rate for the hotels in Africa for you. On the right-hand side is the room rate for a hotel in Africa. It's larger, it's higher than the room rate of a similar hotel in America and in Europe and in almost the bulk of the world. That cannot be right. It's like that because there's only 2 decent hotels in every place. That's an opportunity. Let's go build. We have 10, 12% of the world's gas. What are we doing with that? We have almost every mining resource that you can think of. We send it to China without beneficiating it. This shows you where our minerals is going. Let's go figure out where they're going and see how we work with the people to do something of that. I'm going to go fast here. All I can tell you, if you look at rail infrastructure, we don't have enough. If we look at roads, we don't have enough. If we look at ports, we don't have enough. Every one of these create an opportunity. Now I'm coming to my hot button. If you look at power generation, electricity, power, not power to the people. Yes, power to the people as electricity. Africa has the same installed capacity as Spain, roughly the same as France. A continent of 1 billion people, 3 times the size of China, has the same amount of power as Spain and France. How can this be? Africa has 134,000 megawatts of power. The US has 1,000 megawatts. of this 134 in Africa, South Africa has 50. And Egypt and Algeria, and the rest has nothing. How on earth are we going to grow? How are we going to manufacture stuff if we don't have power? If you look at this two bubbles here on the left-hand top, Africa has 12% of the world's population. It has 2% of the world's power. Come on. The bars on the left show you how the other countries in the world are adding power. The top light green bit is Africa. So let's be careful. If I have to decide today where do I go build my power, there are more opportunities for me outside of Africa, even though with the world in trouble, than there is in Africa. So if we want people to dance with us, we need to be maintaining our attractiveness. Let's take a few. Gas. You can generate power from gas. We have more gas in Africa than we need to generate capacity for the entire continent. What we actually do is only those few bubbles. That's all we do with gas. And I apologize if there are some of my Nigerian friends here. We have a very number of investments there. We spend, I think Nigeria is, of the African countries, most attractive opportunity. So I made this slide so that you cannot read it. But Nigeria has 12,000 megawatts of capacity, and only 4,000 is working, because the others don't have gas. Because, you know, Nigeria has 3% of the world's gas, but is there flaring 34% of the world's gas. Nigeria is flaring enough gas. It's flaring 2 BCF of gas every day, enough for 7,500 megawatts of capacity. They flare. That picture on the right is the flares in Nigeria. Even Nando's had a solution. If we look at coal, we have enough coal to generate electricity for the entire continent. Only a few countries do. If we look at the South African case, and as a South African, I will say, if you price your power inappropriately, people don't build power. If I sell you apples, you ask me what's the price of the apple. You don't ask me how much return do you make on your investment, sir. No, you just ask me how much is the apple. If the price is not right, I don't build. I invest all over. If it's not attractive here, I go where it is, because I need to show a return for my investors. Because if I don't show a return, my investor take their money back. So we can be smart ass and be in the dark, or we can be pragmatic and have power that develop our economies and that grow the continent. Eskom was until it went out. And then they had to do on the middle slide, the 2 lines with their power price, that. And that caused a stimulus that attracted investors. And now you can see from the bar chart at the bottom, they've added new generation capacity. Because the price was right, people came and they built. We have enough solar to light up the entire continent. And the graph on the right shows how well we are doing. Solar prices is coming down. Look on the left. Solar prices is coming down to now almost at grid parity. And therefore, the installed capacity in the rest of the world is going up. But here in the continent where we have most of the sun of everybody else, we don't do enough. We have enough hydro to solve the problems. We don't. We have enough geothermal in East Africa to build about 80,000 megawatts of capacity. We have 173. We have enough wind to drive half of the continent. We have hardly any. Wind, same. Prices coming down. Installed capacity is increasing. And here I will get my commercial. We are looking at adding a wind farm at Lüderitz together with United Africa. Namibia has some of the most attractive wind resources in the world. 9.7 meters per second of wind can generate electricity cheaper than any of the peaking plants in Namibia. That's the opportunity. Our project, 44 megawatt, 50 megawatt here, if you do that with coal, we'll use 60 million liters of water, 24 million kilograms of coal with the carbon footprint that goes along. So, I'm concluding. Africa's consumption is on the rise. We have all the agricultural resources to make something of it. Our manufacturing sector is the best positioned than it has ever been. The real estate opportunity is only now starting. I used hotels tongue in the cheek as an example, but the same is true for office cost. The same is true for all the infrastructure requirement. We are blessed with natural resources. Our black mark is the fact that we do not have power to develop our economies. So, my plea to you would be, the Western world is at its weakest point than it's been for a very long time. And the East is growing at the fastest point than it's been for a very long time. We have a great opportunity. When on the knees, go for the neck. Let's go for this opportunity and do something of very significant scale in our beloved continent. Thank you.